welcome to tonight's Wednesday webinar. We've got special guest Matheson Goddard on, and Matheson is a paralegal and a landlord, the paralegal investor. So if anyone is looking to learn more about being a landlord, or maybe you are already one and just want to learn some tips and tricks from an expert in the industry, this is definitely the place to be. So as always, we're going to start off at 6:05, but we'll start with some story time. So I'm actually going to open it up to the floor. And Matheson, if you have any fun stories from your day, feel free to share it. But I'm going to encourage you guys all to turn on your cameras so I can see your beautiful faces, and definitely participate as we go along. So welcome, Cody. Welcome, Dwayne. Welcome, Vilma and Jordan. What's going on, guys? Hello, hello. Matheson, you got any fun stories for us from your day? Anything crazy happening?
A little earlier this week, I do have one of my tenants. The city shut off the water because they're doing road work on that street. So the tenant calls me and goes, "We have no water." I said, "Well, the city must have shut it off." They're like, "Well, can you call them? I wasn't prepared for this." So I'm like, "You want me to call the city? We'll stop the work, send all the guys home, maybe put the old pipe back in because I'm sure they're switching pipes over, just because you got things to do." I don't think it's going to work that way.
Definitely not.
A fun story about being a landlord is some of the unreasonable requests that you will have inevitably to deal with along the way.
Oh, absolutely.
That was a fun one this week. That was on Monday morning.
There you go. We had Justin and Laura from Tailored Rentals on last week, and Laura just dropped the bomb like anaconda just randomly into conversation when talking about tenants, and I'm like, there's a story behind that. So we made her share the anaconda story. So evidently there was a reptile man, one of the tenants that they were vetting and for their property leasing company, and evidently this guy really likes his reptiles. So there was snakes and lizards and all sorts of fun things. So always surprising when you're a landlord running into different situations that you were not expecting. Does anyone else have fun landlord stories for us just in these next 2 minutes while we're getting rolling? Jordan, I know you got something over there.
Well, it's not really a landlord one, but so I bought this property in Strathroy here, and the keys were being sent by Paralegal. It was the middle of the winter, so I was getting them in a couple days, and I didn't really want the pipes to freeze on this property. Didn't know if they were going to turn off the heat or whatever. So I drive down to Strathroy it was after work, and I actually like credit carded my way through the doors because no one was supposed to be in it. It was in my possession now, just to make sure the heat was on so the pipes didn't freeze. Well, the lady was still in the house, and we met each other at the one entranceway. Scared the heck out of each other. So that was interesting, but yeah, she got out. But yeah, took a couple days.
Geez, yeah. Yeah, we have one property that just recently closed, and the seller remained in following the closing date. So that is always a fun challenge. So definitely always make sure that you're following up with your sellers and maintaining those relationships, and they know promptly when they're supposed to be out of the house anytime you're buying a property as well. So there's always fun things to run into in this world of real estate. But yeah, Jordan, appreciate you sharing your story there, man. Awesome. Well, we're going to get rolling here on the Problems or Profits Wednesday webinar. So welcome everyone. If this is your first time joining the Wednesday webinar, we do these every single Wednesday starting at 6 p.m. and we cover various topics every single week. It's always a good time. This is hosted by myself, Rebecca Lynn Matheson, and Adam J.D. Martin. Now, Adam's not going to be here tonight, but he will definitely be back. So make sure you give us a follow on Instagram at Rebecca Lynn Matheson and at Adam J.D. Martin. We can definitely connect with you on the socials. So tonight, I'm super excited to have Matheson on this Wednesday webinar, not only because we have similar names, his first name is my last name, but Matheson and I actually ran into each other. I was out on a walk and we just started talking, and we happen to both have common interests in real estate investing. So it was fantastic just to run into a like-minded individual who already had rental properties and was looking to continue to grow. So since then, Matheson has continued on his real estate investing journey and beyond, joining Cashflow Tribe and the Real Estate Mastermind Council, and is just continuing to expand and grow, and is definitely focused on real estate investing as a paralegal. So tonight we're going to have some fantastic content and information coming from Matheson tonight. So very excited about that. Just to go over today's agenda, Matheson will do a little introduction of himself, and then he has a fantastic presentation planned for you guys. We're also going to open it up to a live question and answer so that you guys can actually hop in and ask any and all questions that you have for Matheson or I as we go. And then, of course, at the end we'll get into our fan-flippin-tastic private deals, as always. So really excited to have you guys on here. Before we get into it, do not forget to sign up to our Ontario Private Deals Facebook page. This group, since I took this screenshot, has grown to over 7,000 members, and it's growing. So definitely hop over there if you're looking for any off-market deals. We post all of our deals there in addition to other wholesalers and real estate investors. We also more recently have seen some sellers posting their deals directly to the page, which is fantastic. So it's definitely the best source for those off-market real estate deals if you're looking. And if you're not already on our buyers list, which I'm sure most of you are at this point, but if you're new to this, you might not be yet. So mattmckeever.com/private deals is the place to find all of the best private deals directly from our team. And we also have our off-market cottage buyers list, which is definitely the best source for those off-market cottage deals. One other thing to note too is that we are still growing our team. So I'm actually actively seeking wholesalers in those cottage markets who are looking to either be bird dogs or full-time or part-time wholesalers in cottage country. So if you know someone who might be interested in a change or just exploring something like that, make sure you connect them with me. And of course, we have our merch store if you want any of this super sweet Proms or Profits gear. All right, guys. So without further ado, welcome Matheson to the Wednesday webinar.
Well, thank you for having me. I do appreciate it. As you know, my name is Matheson. I've been practicing law for the last decade or so. I do have my own firm, Goddard Legal Services Professional Corporation. If you want to reach me, have any questions, feel free to reach out at Matheson with an IE at GoddardLSPC.com. I can be reached there for questions. Now, for those who are looking to get into investing, or into, if you're already in investing, look to get a multi-residential. Let's share my screen here.
Absolutely. Go for it, Matheson.
Why would you become a landlord? Now, when investing in any real estate with the intent to hold the property for a long term, sometimes you will need a tenant to pay the rent, which covers the monthly expenses, mortgages. Smart investor is going to have a monthly profit in there as well. You're also going to include holding costs related to vacancies and other such things. But you're going to have tenants in there to pay those bills. There are two reasons for this. One, you want the property appreciation over the time. And two, you get the pay down of the principal of the mortgage over time as well. Both are going to create wealth for the future. Both require time in the market. Now you can see from 1999 to 2014, I got this little graph. You see the property appreciation went from about 150,000 up to 400,000 between 1999 to 2014. So you can see a steady growth. Now, even through the 2008 financial crisis we had, which is seen right there, we had a dip in the prices almost by $100,000 in the value of properties. But you can see over the next year in 2009, it did climb back up. So holding a property, even in those devaluation periods, will create wealth over time, and it will continue to increase. Now, I did note since 2014, in March 21, the average home price in Canada has increased to $716,828. Those are from the recent CREA reports. That's up 179% since 2014 alone. Hence why you want to buy and hold onto properties. Now, the immediate things, or being a landlord also means that you must take an active role in the management of the property. Some of the immediate things you should do when taking over a property, or when you have a new tenant moving into your property, is one, do an introduction letter. This will introduce you as the management of the property, unless you've got enough properties that you have somebody in place to take care of the property management for you. In that case, the property manager should definitely introduce themselves as the management of the property. Now, you let the tenants know that you will be around on a certain date between certain hours in the event to meet every tenant. You want to do this. You want to build the relationships with your tenants, because you're going to hold these properties long term, and tenants that know you as a person and understand that not only are you there to take care of any needs that arise, but you are a real person, are going to take care of your property more often, and they're certainly going to pay their rent more often. They won't be somebody, if you're a faceless corporation, tenants can see that as and really not understand that the rent still has to be paid, and they think they're screwing over just a faceless corporation, when it actually is you, one person, the real estate investor, who is getting screwed over financially with them either wrecking the unit or not paying their rent. Now, when you go to the units, you want to inspect every smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. This is mandatory, especially if you're taking over new properties. You don't know when they've been done, and you never want to be at fault for any preventable death. Having working smoke detectors and CO2 or carbon monoxide detectors can save lives in the case of a fire. And I do note my own parents had a fire in their house in January. And thankfully, they had the working smoker alarms. They were able to get out, and they did not have much time to get out. So be sure that those are in working order as soon as you take over a property, and they should be inspected every 6 months or so. Now, this letter.
Yeah, that's actually a great point there. And this builds well from our last week's webinar in talking about some leasing and tenant screening. So this is fantastic if you're taking over an existing tenant to introduce yourself and build out those relationships, or even just taking on a new tenant. I really like that you're highlighting the step-by-step process here of how to actually build that rapport, because it is so essential that you are taking control of your business.
Exactly. And you definitely want to be able to be in control of your properties, because you've got to be in control of every aspect of that property. You got to know what needs and maintenance, what needs to be done, and of course the finances regarding those properties as well. Now, the letter should include the tenant should contact for emergencies, general inquiries during business hours, and reporting repair issues. You should include the last month's rent, and how it is applied when the tenant gives notice. I do note when it comes to the interest that has to be paid on the monthly, you got to also calculate the depreciation of the property. So essentially the two actually cancel themselves out, and you don't have to actually pay interest to tenants on the last month's rent, because there's going to be an increase on the last month rent year-on-year basis if you're properly giving notice to the tenants that there's a rental increase once a year. Of course, for 2021, Landlord Tenant Board and Ontario government have not allowed any rent increases if your tenant is in there, and that should be noted. So you don't have to give out any N1 forms of notice of increased rents for 2021, but be sure to be on that as of January 1st, 2022, because that's when you're going to be first allowed to increase your rent again. You should have a move out inspection policy. You want to do that before the tenant leaves, and you want to do that with the tenant, right? So they can also see what you're seeing when it comes to any damages, whether it's damaged carpet. Be sure to note that carpets do have a lifespan of roughly around 10 years, and understand that each type of flooring would have depreciation over time. And just because a carpet is ruined after a tenant's been in there for 10 years doesn't mean you can get the tenant to replace it. It is still on you, because a carpet's only going to last 10 years generally. Now, in the letter, you should also include that this is a business and you need to treat it that way. So you can't be treating your tenants like they're just friends and family. You still have to remember to keep this a business and keep it professional along the way. In the letter, you also want to include who to talk to about financial matters. There's got to be a rent collection policy, which is always due on the first day of the month, and make sure this is clarified in the letter. There should be a late rent policy in there. Now, of course, under law in Ontario, they don't allow you to charge late fees in there. I do know a lot of landlords still put those late fees in their lease agreements, and tenants may pay these late fees if they've agreed and signed upon those late fees. But if it goes under the Landlord and Tenant Board, you're going to lose because you're not allowed to charge those late rent fees. Don't tell your tenants that. If the rent has not been paid on the first of the month, you have to give them 3 days to pay the rent, and an N4 should be automatic on the 4th day of the month when rent has not been paid. But if the tenant has called you, said they're going to be late for rent, made pre-arrangements that it's going to be maybe 4 days late, they've advised you, you still got to keep the humanity in there. You can say, yeah, no worries, and accept that late payment of rent without filing an N4 every time.
And so just for those of us who maybe aren't up with the lingo here, Matheson, what is an N4 if somebody were to file it? Specifically, as a landlord, what does that form allow you to do, and what does that form mean?
Now that the N4 form is a specific form used by the Landlord and Tenant Board that gives notice to the tenant that the rent is unpaid, and it's a notice of eviction for unpaid rent. Now, this is just a notice. You have to wait 15 days for the tenant. If they have not paid the rent within that 15 days, and that you've specified a specific eviction date, you can move forward to filing an L1 form, which is an application to the Landlord and Tenant Board to actually have the tenant evicted for a non-payment of rent. Now, you can also, with an N4, let's say you've got 4, 5, 6 N4s in 1 year that you've submitted to the tenants, and they just keep being late with the rent and not paying until like the 14th of the month, or waiting to that last day before the notice would qualify into a Landlord Tenant Board action. You can bring an action against a tenant for having a pattern of late payments, and this can still trigger an eviction. Now, you can always provide rent. In the letter, she provide rent payment options, including electronic payment options, which certainly would make it easier for the tenant to pay. It usually doesn't make your life easier because you still got to go back to your accounts and make sure that any payments that have come in have put on your ledgers, and your accountant knows who's paid and who's not. So it doesn't save you a lot of time, but you give those options to the tenants to make it easier for them. And certainly it's easier for the tenants to pay. When it's easier for the tenants to pay, they don't have those excuses that they didn't know how. Now, once the letter has gone to every tenant, visit every tenant, right? You've got to form that relationship with your tenants. They've got to know that you're a person and not just a corporation, right? Prepare a form or a confirmation letter that confirms all the details of their estoppels letter. This is only if you're buying a property, a multi-unit property. And the estoppel will take place prior to you buying the letter or buying the apartment building, and will be included in the purchasing package of the building. Now you take those details from the estoppels letter, which were signed before the purchase of the property, and this would include the tenant's move-in date, late date of a rent increase, the amount of current rent, their phone numbers, email address, details about pets, emergency contact details, emergency or vehicle details, license plates, and assigned parking details. You want to confirm each and every single one of these. The more information that you have, it is easier for you when having to go through a landlord and tenant board action to have that information already on file, because trying to dig up this information once you have to take action against a tenant is nearly impossible. So make sure you confirm all that information. Even having an emergency contact information. Let's say you got the tenant's mother per se. When trying to find a tenant to collect whatever is owed, let's say they did a midnight move out, and they still owe a few months of rent to you. Of course, a judge is going to grant you an order that would allow you to collect that. But if you can't find the person, it's very difficult to collect it. Now, if you've got an emergency contact of a person's mother, you're able to call the person's mother and at least start the process of collecting your unpaid rent through the family of that tenant. Once you've confirmed all those details, get the tenants to sign off on a declaration that they have no current issues outstanding with the landlord. It's especially important when buying a unit with existing tenants in it. And let's say the tenant was already had a sour relationship with the previous landlord. You want to make sure that any issues that tenant had with the previous landlord are known to you, and hopefully you can take care of any outstanding issues that tenant had if the tenant is still choosing to stay within the property. And again, test the smoke detectors. I mentioned this twice because it is very important to make sure that you've got working smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors in the house. And you can remind the tenants the very first time you see them on this that there is no smoking in any of the common areas or inside the unit. This smoking it within the unit is going to depreciate the value of the unit, and you want to make sure it's your policy that it's not allowed inside any of your units, because it's going to cost thousands of dollars when there's significant smoke damage in there. And of course, having to go to the landlord and tenant board to obtain money for the damages of anybody smoking in the unit is a long drawn out process. By doing all these things, you are both starting the new relationship from a common point of understanding. If there's meters, make sure you record the first meter reading and test the master keys of the unit. Most importantly, you want to start that relationship so there's a key understanding that this is a business, and the expectations of both the tenant and the landlord are understood at the beginning of that relationship. Now, when you got a new tenant, it's important to start any business relationship off the right way. Ensure your lease has the expectations in writing. I can go on for a couple hours about this, but this is a whole different webinar. I'm sure we'll go over that in the future. Now, providing a home is a service. Landlords already get a bad rap whenever a journalist writes articles in the newspapers for the masses. Rarely do we see positive news regarding landlords. So don't be part of the problem. Understanding that you must manage your property and take care of issues in a timely manner is key to being a landlord. I'm starting to lose my voice at the end of the day here.
All of that work, man. Yeah, no, I definitely appreciate what you're saying here, though. Like, it's so essential that in any sort of business that you're running, whether you're a landlord, whether you're an owner operator of any kind of company, that you're building out that relationship with ultimately your customers and anyone that you're working with long term. So this ideally is going to be a long-term relationship, and frankly, things will pop up. There will be issues that will arise. So starting that relationship off by going through all of the outlines of what needs to happen and laying out a clear roadmap to what's going to happen in certain circumstances. Say if you're not getting your rent paid, et cetera, I think it is important that you do lay that out. And we see that a lot actually with new landlords, new investors that get super keen and excited. They buy their first duplex, maybe they live on one side, and they have absolutely zero clue how to be a landlord. So it is actually important that you do have these steps taken care of, that you do the little things like check that smoke detector, and just ultimately connect with the person on a person-to-person basis. It is still important though that you are running it like a business where you have those really fail-safes built in with those forms, as you discussed, Matheson, with the notice coming in, just so you have a record and so you're covering all of your bases. Because as much as it is easy to be more relational and become buddy with your tenants, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, kicking back and having a cold one, a brewski with some of your pals. If you don't also have these measures in place and you're not protecting your business, then it can easily turn when, you know, shit hits the fan. So always just make sure that you're doing those little things right and having your bases covered, and setting up your home for success in any of these things. So yeah, definitely really appreciate that, Matheson, just in terms of like laying out that roadmap for that relationship going forward.
Exactly. And if you think about being a landlord as being a parent to an adult child rather than like a boss to a tenant, you're going to have a lot less issues with your tenants. Make sure your tenants understand that when you do have to provide a form to them, it's nothing personal. Just always tell them it's just our policy that a form goes out on the 4th of the month for an N4 per se. And make sure that they just understand that's the business part of it, right? When tenant feels their needs as a tenant are being met, the relationship, or when they're not being met, the relationship may become hostile, and this will cost you money. So things as simple as light bulbs per se. Anyone that owns a home knows that lights are going to go out all the time. Tenants are going to expect you to replace these things, and you should do this in a timely manner. If you could be attentive to those needs, obviously that's not an emergency for a light bulb, but if you could be attentive to those needs in a very timely manner, you're going to keep a better relationship with that tenant, and they're not going to be hostile towards you for little things that may come up. Now, be kind and be professional. One of my favorite stories was from Adam himself. He's not here to share in this moment. But Adam, as a landlord, because he had student rentals, would purchase beer and pizza for his tenants on the day they moved in, right? So he'd have pizza and beers, the parents are there and everyone's coming in. and start the relationship off that way, right? Everyone's tired from moving all day. And he was able to not only meet all the tenants on that day, got to meet the parents and start the relationship off on the right foot while taking that opportunity certainly to lay down the expectations while he was there. And this is one way to really start off a good relationship with any new tenant you have, especially if you want to get into the student rental market. I do believe that is the end of what I was going to talk about.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I really like that point at the end. And I do love Adam's story in that context, because I do think that it's important to really build out that relationship. And who doesn't like, you know, sitting back, getting pizza when you're moving? You probably didn't have time to actually go and grab food. You're in a rush. You got the moving truck, you know, chaos is ensuing. So I think it is really great to set up those little things and do those little things that actually make a big difference, you know, grabbing a bottle of wine, grabbing a case of beer, grabbing a pizza, and also going in and being proactive about certain things like light bulbs, because like in your own home, those are just the little things that like give you that like annoyance, like, oh, I got to fix that light. Oh, that thing's wrong. Oh, that thing's wrong. Like, as a tenant, having those little things that are just always taken care of just makes your living space more desirable for them to want to take care of as their own space. So this really, really pairs well with our conversation from last week, Matheson. I really appreciate you laying out the roadmap there, because not only is it important to get the right tenants in place, which is where a leasing company or some sort of property management company can be very effective in pre-screening your tenants. It's important that once you do have tenants in place, whether you're absorbing them or you're bringing in new tenants, that you set that relationship off on a good start. So definitely appreciate that. Now, Matheson, can you tell us a little bit about some of the tenant relationships that you've had? Because I know that you definitely have really made the effort to build those relationships with your tenants. Matheson, you still there, buddy? We've lost him. All right.
I can say, well, the tenant that I did have when this COVID thing happened, I had a really good tenant in there. I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, just a major delay. We're good. Technical difficulties. No worries, guys. Well, what we'll do is, Matheson, once you come back on with us, we'll open up the floor to questions and to your tenant stories. So, guys, now is the time. If you do have any questions, we can answer those live. So feel free to toss them in the chat and we'll get some conversation going just about these tenant relationships and beyond. So if anyone wants to, feel free, you can raise your virtual hand or just toss that into the chat. Looks like Matheson's dropped off here, so feel free to ask away and we can get started with that Q&A while Matheson is coming back. Not all at once.
Am I back yet?
Yep, you're back. There we go. I just opened up the floor to a Q&A. So now is definitely the time if anyone wants to hop on. We got Matheson back in the house. We've got a question here from Dwayne saying, when taking over a property with existing tenants, should I write up a new lease? Fantastic question, Dwayne.
The answer would be no. The existing lease is just fine, and the existing lease is the contract that you should be taking over, and you will have to abide by that existing contract. If you're taking over a property and there is a lease in place and you were looking to, let's say you wanted to get the tenants out so you can increase rents or do renovations, you cannot send that, you cannot evict that tenant, and at least until the end of the lease. That lease is in place. It's a contractual obligation that you will have taken over that property.
Awesome. Thanks,
Matheson,
Matheson.
actually, sorry, Matheson, I'm actually in Nova Scotia, so our rules are a little bit different, I think.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
Ontario is one of the most, we'll call it socialist states when it comes to tenant rules, and how the Ontario government's put rules in place to really help tenants out and ensure that the landlords look like the bad guys.
Yeah, what you just said, though, still would apply here in Nova Scotia, though. Like when I'm taking over a building, I'm taking over that lease as well. But I noticed that the existing landlord here in Nova Scotia, we don't get first and last month's rent. We get first month's rent, of course, and we get 50% maximum of that rent for damage deposits, and which can also be used against rent being unpaid. But this existing landlord, he actually has 1 full month's rent damage deposit. So as far as I'm concerned, when I take it over, I'll be reimbursing them 50% because that's actually illegal. So,
and that is a good thing to do if you want to stay within the law, and that's how you got to conduct yourself, right? It's not about what you can get away with. It's about what you can do to serve others.
yeah,
and if you got the mindset of serving others and serving your tenants as that property owner, you will do far better in the end.
Yeah, I find with tenants though, like I've been doing it for a long time actually, and there's going to be some people that are hard to deal with, but like I'll give you an example. I have 2 units, one over top of the other one's in a 6-unit place, and one person was complaining about the noise and of the person having TV on loud at night. But anyhow, they actually ended up working it out themselves. And there are some really, that's the thing, there's a real stereotype out there with tenants. I find they're not all bad. 99% of tenants are actually good, but I think they need training almost from the landlords right from the start, because when a young person moves out and they're late with the rent and you don't charge them that late fee, it's like you say, it's almost like a spoiled child. You're training them now for the next landlord. And I think that's what's happened in our business. They're not, the landlord is actually not doing what they should be doing from the start with younger people. Like,
yeah, he's not keeping that relationship professional right from the start and making sure that everything is done in a very timely manner.
exactly.
Certainly when it comes to older buildings as well, I wanted to mention where there is a noise transference from unit to unit and the sound barrier is not up to the standards that tenants would like, it is good to have in your lease just a little paragraph that states that the building is an older building and sound travels, and there is going to be noise from other units that you will be here, and you can at least state the types of noise that you should expect to hear and that you're going to have to expect and live with as part of the charm of the property.
Yes, 100%.
That is a nice reframe right there. It's part of the charm of the property. You sly dog, you. All right, next question here is coming in from Jordan Armstrong, and it's BN4. Do you mail it, drop it off yourself, or email it? What is the best method here, Matheson?
What was the question there?
So for the N4, what is the best method of delivery?
It's usually, especially now in these days of COVID times, and it's quite okay to email it. And that usually ensures if you email it the first time and they try to make a claim that they didn't receive it, certainly I wouldn't continue to use email as the purpose, and you can even tape it on their door. That will ensure that it also gets there, and take a little picture that it was on the door at the right address. But certainly I would suggest email is the best because it still keeps it professional, but you don't want to become too adversarial with the tenant either. You just want to give them a simple reminder that rent's due, unless it's constantly being late, and then you've got to take a harder stance against it.
Awesome. Now, we had the same question come in from another person on the webinar privately, but would the N5 form be the same, Matheson, or should that be delivered differently?
Depending on which province you're in. Most forms can be delivered via email, especially during lockdowns and COVID time. There is some forms. I'm not going to get into every single form that you're really going to need to have to hand deliver, but an N5 should be all right to send through the email, of course.
Perfect. Okay, next question here, Matheson, is from Krunal. So taking over a property with existing tenants that smoke inside the units, what's the best way to ask them not to do it? And what steps should I take if they continue smoking?
Once they've started, you can't really force them not to smoke in their unit. They still have the rights, essentially, especially if they've already set a precedent of being allowed to smoke in the unit. It's hard to retract that right. And there's no real legislation that allows you to firmly say that you can't smoke within the unit. Unfortunately, that is the situation that you could give them reminders of why they shouldn't be smoking within the unit, especially in common areas, and how the smoke would escape into common areas, or at least tell them that the depreciation and this destruction the smoke causes on the walls and in the ceilings, that cost, if they don't quit smoking within the unit, that cost can be put over to them when they move out of the unit.
Okay, great to know. Thank you for that, Matheson. Next question is coming in from Brock, and he's asking, what are the allowances or expectations with late payments in Ontario?
Allowances and expectations with late payments. There's really no late payment fees allowed in Ontario, according to the legislation. Now, of course, a tenant can agree to, in a lease, to pay late fees if they are late with the rent. However, if you want to enforce that, landlord-tenant board, you're not going to be able to.
Awesome. Any other questions, guys? That is all that I have in the chat. If anyone does have a question that they want to pop on.
I think Scott Ramsey has a question here.
Oh yeah, go right ahead, Scott.
Yeah, mine's a bit of a two-part question. I bought a duplex in St. Catharines a while ago. We've been pushing the closing because the owners can't get the tenants out. They've been problem tenants, and that's why they're selling. So we're going to evict them for owner possession. Now, I understand the 1 year rules, but if it's a duplex, do we need to, because we're going to renovate both units, do we need to take on both units, or can we only inhabit half of it and still rent one of the other units? And if one unit is my primary residence, can I then use that as an Airbnb? And third part of the question, if that doesn't work out and we're not comfortable doing the year, if we flip it after the renovations after 3 months, does that eviction notice for owner possession transfer on to the new owners, or is that a clean slate for the new owners?
If you didn't, you have to live in the unit for a full year. If you're claiming that you need the unit for your own use and personal use, you must be making that claim in good faith. If the previous tenant finds out that you're no longer in the unit, they can make a claim to the landlord and tenant board that you made that claim in bad faith, and you could be on the hook for thousands of dollars in restitution when it comes to making it a bad faith claim. And that's if, of course, if they find out. Now, you certainly can evict a tenant for the need of extensive renovations, especially if you have to go inside the walls and fix electrical, plumbing, insulation, or anything like that. And it's usually a better route to go to rather than just going after. I know a lot of people, when taking over a property, will claim that they are needing it for personal use, but if they're not actually moving in and using it for personal use, and you don't have the intent to use it for personal use for the entire year, you're setting yourself up for some liability and a claim that can be made against you. It's always best to act in good faith and and with honesty. And I understand the frustrations of getting bad tenants out, but you can get them out and ask them to move out for extensive renovations.
I'm happy to move into the bottom unit. That was the second part of my question, was if I did that, can I rent the upper unit, or do I have to take on the whole house for the year, or is there a percentage rule on that?
It is just the unit that the tenant was in that is under the rule, right? So if you're evicting them because you're going to take possession of that unit, or one of your family members that are going to take possession of that unit, the rule just applies to that very single unit. It doesn't apply to the entire house of a duplex. Does that clear it up?
Yeah, and then the last part was just if I sold it after 3 months, if I flipped it, does that affect the new buyer? Because I was going to take it on for my personal possession, decided that I didn't want it, flipped it, and can I just transfer that home and there's no issue for the new buyer?
Yeah, that's not going to affect the new buyer at all, but you are still on the hook for the entire year if the tenant finds out that you sold the property or put it back on MLS and you're not keeping the property for your own personal use. That tenant also could have rights granted to him to move back into that property after it's renovated at the same rent that he was paying previous to the renovation. Hence why it's always best to evict a tenant for a major renovation rather than saying that you need the unit for yourself if you're not intending to actually be in the unit for yourself. Of course, in Ontario, the tenant does have a right to move back into the unit after the renovations are complete at the same previous rent that there was before. And you have to give notice to that previous tenant if that was a reason that they did have to move out. There's ways around that, but I'm not going to put that in a recorded video.
Awesome. Appreciate that answer. And thank you so much, Scott, for your question. Always good to see you, Scotty. And Dwayne, you're up next. Go right ahead.
So Matheson, on this property that I'm looking at taking over, this existing owner, he doesn't have inspection reports. Like here in Nova Scotia, well, I always do an inspection report in and out. So I'm thinking I'm going to write up an inspection report when I take over. I don't know how it's going to apply to the law, but I would think it's certainly not going to hurt. So that's what I plan on doing. I just want to know what your thoughts were on that.
That is absolutely something you should do when you take over a property. Is again, when you visit that tenant, make sure that you're checking for any issues that may be within the maintenance issues within the unit. And of course, having that document and understanding what's needed in each and every single apartment, even if they are rented, is really something you have to do your due diligence on and make sure that you've done that on your very first visit. And be prepared with a checklist per se to have those things inspected. And you do that when you're inspecting those smoke alarms and carbon monoxide detectors.
Great. All right. Thank you.
Awesome.
You're
Thanks,
welcome.
Dwayne. Next up is Benjamin asking, if you're renting out your unit fully furnished, how can you protect yourself against damage or stolen furnishings? Can you add something to the lease?
You absolutely have to put it in the lease of what the furnishings within the unit are. I would even go so far as to put the replacement cost of the furnishings within the unit, if they get damaged or destroyed, that they will be responsible for those replacement costs of the furniture that's existing within the unit. Now, of course, the tenant wouldn't have to buy you a brand new couch if there is a used couch within the unit. And of course, you have to expect, if you're renting out a unit with furnishings in there, there's going to be your normal wear and tear and depreciation value of the furnishings within the unit.
Absolutely. Appreciate that. At what part of the process would you request an estoppel letter Is it a condition in the APS, and would you get them at closing? So we'll start there, and then there's a second part to this question.
Yeah, the estoppel letters are part of the purchasing package. They have to be done prior to you purchasing the property, and they need to be part of the purchase package.
Appreciate that. And with regards to the issues the tenants might have with the previous landlord, wouldn't the landlord have access to this and potentially hide/tamper with the info to the new owner?
This is why it's key to actually visit every single tenant when taking over a property, to have that conversation with the tenant. Once you own the property and you're going around doing your own due diligence on each and every unit, the previous landlord is not going to have access to any of your information. I don't imagine you'd want to give the previous landlord any of that information anyway. He sold the building, he's moved on, and that information is being used for your own planning and your own knowledge of what needs to be done within a unit.
Absolutely. Next question here is from Michelle. She's asking about the cash for keys strategy. She's heard of this, and she would like to know about that cash for keys strategy, where you give an incentive with some cash, like a month or two rent for them to move out.
Now, the cash for keys is an agreement that's being made that ends, obviously, it ends a tenancy and any rights the tenant would have to the property. And it needs to be documented when you're doing the cash for keys. You want to have an agreement in place that the tenancy is ended, and the consideration being given to the tenant is the cash of whatever said numeration that may be. But you definitely want to put that in that's a brand new contract, an agreement that's being made. And it's a great way to get tenants to move out of a unit, that whether it needs renovations or you just want to increase the rent. And certainly you want to have everything in writing when you're doing your cash for keys, but it's a great tool to use, and especially if you're good with the negotiation skills when it comes to the tenants. But again, you have to make sure that you've written in the agreement that the tenant understands that they are they're no longer having any rights to the unit under the Landlord or the Residential Tenancies Act, and will not pursue any further actions through the Landlord and Tenant Board upon receipt of the cash for keys.
Gotcha. Yeah, definitely appreciate that. Cash for keys is a strategy that's talked a lot about with real estate investors. So definitely appreciate the context there, Matheson, given about the documentation process, because it is important that you've covered all of your bases there. Next question comes from Dwayne asking, what are your thoughts on the Landlord Credit Bureau?
I have no thoughts on the Landlord Credit Bureau.
Question answered. All right. Next question. I've heard that Ontario landlord lease agreements are pretty standard, and the clauses you add in will be void under the Landlord and Tenant Board. Does that still apply?
There's certainly some clauses that will be null and void, like under Section 14 of the Residential Tenancies Act. Any clause that says there's no pets allowed is automatically null and void. You can put them on in any lease. However, noting the understanding is that any damage that is caused by the pets is the responsibility of the tenant. And if it has to be fixed or replaced when the tenant moves out, those costs will be passed on to the tenant once they are moving out.
Awesome. All right, guys, last chance here for questions before we progress on here to our private deals. Any more questions here from Matheson before we wrap up our Q&A? All right, I have a question for you, Matheson. What is your favorite or weirdest law?
What is my favorite or weirdest law?
Yes.
Definitely the law in Ontario. No, it's actually in the Canadian Criminal Code that there is not, you're not allowed to have any cockfighting rings in Canada. It's prohibited under criminal law. It's certainly my favorite law. And that means you're just not allowed to get your chickens to fight if you have chickens. And it is written as cockfighting. So that's an entertaining and one of my favorite laws.
I can't imagine what kind of cockfighting rings were going on in the past to make that actually come into legislation.
Maybe it was during the last lockdown.
Hey man, you gotta keep yourself entertained, I guess.
Right, they didn't have Netflix back then.
Oh man. Well, Matheson, I really, really appreciate you coming on today. Always a pleasure. Matheson squared over here, rocking out. So always love having you on and hearing your fantastic insight and expertise in this field. And I cannot wait to see your whatever it's called. I'm blanking on words right now. Your firm, brokerage. What is it called in law terms? I'm just thinking of mortgages right now.
It's called a firm. It's a law
firm. Okay, wonderful. I cannot wait to see your law firm just continue to grow and expand. So Matheson, where can people find you if they want to?
I'm certainly on Instagram at Matheson_Goddard. I'm also available at info@goddardlspc.com on an email, or you can email me directly at Matheson@goddardlspc.com. That's Matheson with an IE.
Amazing. Now, Matheson, just can you give us a brief overview of what your legal firm, what your law firm does in terms of services for landlords? Because I know that that's an area that you specifically focus on. So what types of services can landlords or tenants come to you for?
When it comes to the landlord and tenant board, going in front of a judge, certainly understanding the law, knowing the rules, understanding how to negotiate prior to going in front of the judge to set out your case is something that you're going to need a licensed paralegal. If you try to go in by yourself, you could find yourself in a situation where the judge is scolding you for not following the proper procedures, not understanding the rules of procedure, or not understanding the laws that are in place. And the last thing you want to do is set yourself up for a reputation of having the judge think that you're a terrible landlord. So having someone that can present you in the best case scenario is what we do, ensuring that your reputation is going to stay intact, because a tenant at any time can bring, when they're going to landlord-tenant board, can bring up anything they want without a prior notice to the landlord when they're arguing cases. And that's certainly something that you would want myself representing you at the landlord-tenant board. For the most part, anybody's got any quick questions, anything that takes me less than 15 minutes, I'm usually always happy to help, and it's not something that I would go out and bill for. But if you want somebody who's going to negotiate with tenants, especially with cash for pleas or writing up the documentation for it, or representation for negotiations in the landlord-tenant board in front of the judge, I'm your guy.
Amazing. Well, Matheson, always a pleasure. And definitely reach out to Matheson on all of the social media platforms. Check out his website. And certainly if you have any sort of tenant situation that you need some assistance with, Matheson is certainly your guy.